So, Eric Eisele, CEO
Oh,
of Growflux, thank you for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
sorry, can you start over? My last name is pronounced Eisele.
Isley, sorry. That's helpful. I should have asked you that first. Sorry. Uh, so, Eric Isley, CEO of Growflux, thank you for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Hey, it's great to join you.
So, what's the last conference you've been at, vertical farming wise?
Oh, geez. Well, we just got back from Cultivate. Before that, we did Indoor Ag Tech
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Brooklyn, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. That
Right, the
was
last
good.
vertical farming one.
Yep, that's where we met.
Yep.
And what's your usual takeaways when you come back home? How do you decide if a conference visit was productive or worth your time?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Um, so we really enjoyed the conference. Some conferences are for generating leads
Yeah.
and doing business. Some conferences are more about um, positioning and building relationships.
Hmm.
And so I would say this one was a little bit more of the latter
Yeah.
um, compared to other conferences where we're quite literally taking orders.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And this is Cultivate?
Yeah, Cultivate would be a little bit more of like the order kind of taking
Okay.
conference.
And I don't think I'm familiar with that one. Where was that?
It's in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
It's been there for ages.
Yeah.
It's more centered around the greenhouse agriculture space.
Yeah. And where's home for you now?
Philadelphia,
Okay. And were you born and raised there?
yes.
Okay. What's something about Philadelphia that people don't know about, but they should?
Well, specific to this industry, we're very close to Kennett,
Okay.
Pennsylvania, and it's one of the largest centers for controlled environment agriculture in the U.S. Primarily from the mushroom cultivation industry.
Hmm.
So there's a pretty significant packing, logistics, and distribution business that has come about due to around half of all the mushrooms being grown in one county. But today it's really diversified um, into other perishables on the logistics side, and there's a lot of momentum to bring to really grow indoor vertical farming in
Yeah.
this region.
Um, what was life like growing up in Philadelphia?
Well, I grew up in the suburbs,
Okay.
um, went to college at Drexel University in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Um, I grew up with an interest in horticulture and agriculture. I was a tinkerer, and so most of my interest took me into uh, more into the physics realm and
Hmm.
semiconductors, material science. And I think shortly after I left college and started a career in architecture, I kind of looked at what's happening in the industry and decided to kind of take some passions and pull them together and enter the space.
Uh, Where if I was to ask your parents what were some of the projects you were tinkering with when you when you were younger, what would they say?
Oh, yeah, I would get in trouble with my mom quite a bit. I was into a lot of electrical engineering kind of projects from an early age around middle school.
Hmm.
She was always afraid I would burn the house down. Um, I was I was building lasers and
Oh wow.
uh, building things like laser activated. Well, yeah, let's just say I was in the model rocketry. Don't want to get into the specifics. I was
Yeah.
building when I was a little kid, someone might come knocking on my door.
Where were you getting these instructions? Is it you're just looking up stuff on the web or?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days of the internet, I mean, it wasn't that early for the internet, but there was a much fewer resources out there. So, before college years, bear in mind my freshman year in college, my university was one of the handful that had early access to Facebook.
Oh, wow.
So to put that in perspective, that's,
Yeah.
you know, I grew up on the internet pre-Facebook, and,
Yeah.
um, you know, and building computers and running, various flavors of Linux and such. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of a little bit of where I came from. And back then, most of the information came from just websites, these pretty simple websites. Some of them are still up, actually. I
Yeah.
check them out from time to time. And, if it's not that, it's, some pretty dusty books.
Was there anyone that you remember being an inspiration, either from books you read or stuff you were looking up, other famous thinkers?
Uh, yeah, yeah. I was involved in the International Science Engineering Fair as a kid. Um, Pretty early on, started building relationship with some faculty at Drexel University, this school I went to.
Yeah.
So they kind of started recruiting me in high school.
Okay.
So I kind of started getting exposed from like an early age.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think back, I'm a child of the 80s, so I think back in that time, it was Radio Shack.
Yeah. Well,
Were there?
they were good if you needed, you know, some supplies or solder or whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
back when I was younger, there was a number of websites that you could just buy all these like surplus electronics from.
yeah.
And sometimes you just end up with this box of just random parts, unmarked electronic components.
That's
So it was
funny.
always kind of a challenge. Um, when I was a kid, my dad would take me over to, there was this educational store. Today it's an educational store. It's called Edmund Scientific, and they ran a
Okay.
surplus shop, and you could buy like old military hardware.
Wow.
Like some of the stuff you could buy was just like unbelievable. I think they closed that portion down,
Yeah.
and today it's just the optics and education division. But yeah, I was always getting my hands on uh, yeah, lots of interesting hardware as a electronics tinkerer back when I was young.
Well, kudos to your folks to let you do some of that exploration. I guess with the only caveat that you don't burn the house down.
Yeah, yeah, they were very accommodating.
That's nice. So you mentioned the optics and obviously the lasers, and I saw early on that you were doing work with LEDs and understanding like um, how to influence circadian like patterns with LEDs. Did you feel that, with the things that you were tinkering in, that aspect, in the laser, the optics, that's really what was piquing your attention?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always had a pretty intense interest in photonics.
Mm.
Around, when I was in college, I started working for DuPont,
Okay.
um, mostly on the processing, purification, and testing of high performance OLED materials. These are
Hmm.
organic light emitting semiconductors.
Yeah.
So they're essentially small plastic-like molecules that you can inkjet print, you could vapor deposit onto a surface and make that a pixel,
Yeah.
more or less. So the same technology that's used today in smartphone displays, most predominantly. Um, I was working in the lab, and kind of seeing what it takes to move the needle in some of the leading edge photonics technologies. I mean, we were a team of 500 chemists and engineers within our
Wow.
business unit, with substantial investment over many, many years to build these high performing semiconductor materials that efficiently create light,
Hmm.
and for the purpose of displays. And so I have that firsthand experience, being at that bleeding edge, being in this, just a cog in this very large organization. And we started to engage a little bit of that with GrowFlux.
Yeah.
Um, Back in the really early days of GrowFlux, we were trying to push the formulation of the phosphorant cereals to actually create combinations of violet phosphor converted plus green phosphor converted. The idea of just mixing the right blend of broad spectrum phosphor converted LEDs for horticulture and deep red LEDs to get the overall aggregate efficiency up, as well as maintaining tunability. So that was one of the things I was looking at with
Okay.
GrowFlux. But it's a really tough game to play in as a small company,
Yeah.
because it's very expensive to obtain the phosphor materials themselves. There's a lot of patents around it. It's it's dominated by a number of companies that have decades of experience in the phosphorus space.
Mm-hmm.
So in the really early days of GrowFlux, we were engineering at the LED chip level,
Okay.
and so over time, more and more, we've gotten away from that and instead really focused on the wireless IoT and cloud aspects of
Yeah.
horticultural lighting.
Yeah, so that was the focus of the work you were doing at KieranTimberlake as well, like just developing and understanding the possibilities with IoT.
Well, so KieranTimberlake is a really fascinating research and architecture firm based here in Philadelphia. Um, they are known for their environmentally conscious and sustainable design, um, ranging from projects like the United States Embassy in London. Um, and what we do at KieranTimberlake is they have a full-time research group that is charged with asking and answering questions, oftentimes using new tools that are new
Mm-hmm.
to architecture. So I have my co-founder here at GrowFlux. I actually met at KieranTimberlake.
Okay.
We hired him as an intern to build some wireless sensor networks,
Okay.
mostly using essentially like Zigbee-like wireless tech. And what we were doing is we were monitoring indoor air quality, we were monitoring indoor thermal comfort, we were monitoring the performance of facades, the thermal performance of facades. So we would actually sensor various layers of the building
Wow.
envelope. So a building envelope might consist of a half dozen different materials,
Yeah.
and then measuring the performance over time of each layer on each face of the building can give us a picture into how heat is flowing into the building.
Yeah.
So we were basically putting certain density of sensors in buildings to the extent that we had to use IoT technologies to actually aggregate and transport all of the data. So we built completely new tools at KieranTimberlake for monitoring buildings.
How many in a typical building, just ballpark estimate, how many sensors are we talking about here?
Well, so all commercial buildings have a multitude of sensors.
Okay.
They're mostly inserted into the HVAC system.
Okay.
And they're mostly these very high reliability hardwired sensors that are part of these control loops.
Yeah.
Um, at KieranTimberlake, what we were trying to do is answer questions that required a higher density of sensors that were more rapidly deployed in places where architects needed those sensors. So,
Okay.
for example, putting a sensor in a ventilated curtain wall assembly. It's there's advanced facade systems out there. They don't always have sensors in them, and
Yeah.
assessing performance of these advanced facade systems often requires just quickly putting a sensor in it and looking at 9 months of data.
Hmm.
So that's the kind of question asking we were engaging with these sensors. We even renovated an old bottling plant in the Northern Liberties neighborhood of Philadelphia, and we put, God, I think it was like 90 sensors in just the
Oh, wow.
roof,
Oh, really? Oh,
to understand. Yeah, the as well as the whole vertical space. It's like a 43-foot high ceiling in the main office space, and so there we're trying to understand questions around thermal stratification. We had a high performance underfloor ventilation systems. We had a ton of sensors under there. And so it was, yeah, we really did some outstanding work in thermal performance and also thermal comfort
yeah.
monitoring. So
Yeah, it seems like it's one of those things that people take for granted when they're in the building and it's just perfectly climate controlled and they don't realize all the stuff that's happening in the background to get it to that point and all the
Mhm.
research that's gone into not only understanding what's happening inside the building, but to your point, even the multiple layers of the skin of the building, how that's being studied on a constant basis to see what the impacts of the external environments. And I can already see how this we're starting to lead into these conversations about, greenhouses and indoor farming. But it's
Mhm.
fascinating. It, it looks like, I mean, it sounds like you also in parallel with your passion for electronics and LEDs and IoT. The architecture thing is interesting too. Is that something that was also just obviously an interest for you and a passion for you, just aesthetics and design when it comes to architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated by the design profession,
Mm.
and when I had the opportunity to work at one of the top firms that happens to just be in Philly. I mean, I was applying to jobs in Belgium at the time,
Oh yeah, wow.
and at the time, my top pick for jobs was KieranTimberlake, and I was
Okay,
lucky enough to spend 7 years there.
that's
It was
great.
one of the most formative years of my career, I feel. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most fascinating things to me about that trajectory moving from architecture, and specifically that's architecture of high performing buildings, um, to this space is I've been able to see how this industry is maturing and borrowing practices and concepts from the commercial building space.
Yeah,
So, for example, when I was working in architecture, this concept of measurement and verification became a pretty big deal. The idea that you you pay engineers to commission the systems within a building when construction is complete, and you monitor that, and then you do continuous commissioning. So you come back and you look at the data and you say, well, what needs to be adjusted within the systems?
hmm.
So all those practices were in the really formative stages when I was working in architecture, and we're starting to see some of these practices now transfer over into CEA.
Yeah.
Um, we're also starting to see some of the professionals uh, transition into this space as well. So that's been really fascinating for us to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting because in these conversations we talk a lot about what's happening inside the building and all the advancements that are being made, from the hydroponics, the robotics, to the LEDs, the automation, the climate control. But there seems to be a lot more that can also that's available as opportunities for expansion and growth and innovation when it comes to thinking about the actual physical building itself, because that plays a large role in
Hmm.
what happens and what you need to control. So I think to your point, I think if you're clearer about what's happening outside and to the extent that you can control and monitor that, it feels like you can do a better job inside the building once you understand
Hmm.
those variables as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's often. I'm glad you mentioned that because it's often lost on a lot of people in this industry that buildings are very complex machines, and a
Yeah,
building envelope is very complicated.
yeah.
Um, and even within architecture, there's not enough people that really understand building envelopes really well. And so, when you look at the typical project delivery process for a large indoor cannabis facility, a lot of designers essentially assume that as long as it's within the building envelope, those are controlled conditions. Well, we at GrowFlux, we haven't been doing a lot of sensor work lately, but
Hmm.
commercially, but internally we use a lot of sensors. We do a lot of sensing with our own technology. And we've seen how a building envelope can drive thermal gradients within a cultivation space.
Hmm.
We're very familiar with that, and it's something that there's really not enough people that are looking at it and accounting for it in the design process. Um, and there's also really just a severe lack of tools as well.
So, as we start to now move forward in the timeline, let's talk a little bit about how now all these passions and things you're working on are coming together. Now we're introducing another interest, which may have been there all along, but horticulture, agriculture, CEA. How did that start to become more on your radar? And maybe talk a little bit about your experience starting GLASE as well.
Sure. Well, to be clear, I was involved in GLASE in the early days. I did not start GLASE.
Okay.
Um, let's see, around probably like 2015, I feel there's a pretty significant increase in the amount of innovation that was kind of happening in the indoor vertical farming space. Started seeing a little bit more activity around LEDs and greenhouses, and prior to all of this, I had started and transitioned out of a company that was doing LED lighting control with wireless meshes for the purpose of managing human circadian rhythms
Mm, wow.
in hospitality, commercial spaces, mostly not exactly residential. Um, so we were looking to implement circadian lighting at scale and got some of the first patents in LED lighting control for human circadian lighting. Uh,
I know we can just for the benefit of the listener and just to explain the concept of circadian lighting and circadian rhythms and the importance of it. And I've been delving a little bit into that as well
mhm.
from the self biohacking perspective. But I'm just curious if you could just kind of give a little 30-second primer on why that's important.
Sure. Yeah. So, we've always known that light is a very significant driver for our own biological clocks. But in 2008, some researchers discovered some cells inside the eye that are called, it's a bit of a mouthful, but they're abbreviated iPRGCs. That's intrinsically photoreceptive retinal ganglion cells. What these cells do is they don't create images. They detect light, and they detect specific wavelengths of light. So that is centered on the blue, specifically right around 464 nanometers. It does bleed off into violet and into green, but it's most sensitive at blue. And what that does is it triggers a hormonal response that regulates the release of serotonin and melatonin that ultimately determine our biological clock throughout the day. And study after study has shown increased productivity, better performance in test scores in classroom settings with the right amount of light. So that is typically very well lit classrooms, for example. Likewise, many studies have shown the relationship of lack of light and seasonal affective disorder. So then you have shift work dysfunction. So the science that actually tied this all together really started advancing in the early 2010s. Um, and today, on any of your devices, you can set your schedule and your screens will adjust.
Yeah.
But back when I had started this company called Sumalux, uh, there was, LED technology was in its infancy. Um, People were selling $200 LED light bulbs. We were selling, didn't really have a price, but wireless meshed tunable lights
Yeah.
back in the 2008, 2009 timeframe.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think that's helpful. So just to bring you back, you were talking about how you were working on the mesh lighting at the time, and then seeing what was happening in the hospitality space as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, we had some experience over the years with lighting in kind of like a hospitality setting, and exactly what people need to actually commission these systems. And doing it at scale means that you're working with technicians that are removed from by layers of businesses. So you have to start to look at the actual ease of use and the technology that you're using. And when we were building wireless sensor networks for the architecture space, it was whether you're using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or Zigbee, still, very high touch installation process. Making sure the devices communicate when you're putting them in, even when it's quote unquote plug and play, often was, not as straightforward as it really should have been. And so really started to we really started to get an understanding of the level of reliability and how much these systems just have to have a completely streamlined installation process where the person installing the equipment and the person using the equipment doesn't need to understand how the wireless works. That's really, really important. So really started to figure that one out around the time I started GrowFlux. And what I did is I early on I built a relationship with a European company that really pioneered what I like to consider as like a next generation wireless mesh technology. And that's it's 6LoWPAN built on top of 802.15.4. It's some technical jargon there, but
Yeah.
basically what it means is it's a flavor of wireless networking that has more in common with your standard, Ethernet and Wi-Fi. Everything gets an IP address
Okay.
than it does with some proprietary protocol that has to talk to one device on site
Sure.
to translate its addresses.
Yeah.
So at GrowFlux, we started really investing in that wireless mesh technology as far back as 2016. It took a long time to get that off the ground and really build out that reliability, especially using sub-gigahertz frequencies to penetrate through concrete walls and things like
Yeah.
that. Between the vertical farming space and the cannabis industry, we have dealt with everything from installing vertical farms in old historic buildings with like 2-foot thick masonry walls, to communicating through the concrete slabs of grow rooms where the walls of the rooms are divided with metal walls. So you have to
Wow.
go through concrete. And so, all of this is really just to collapse the costs and complexity in commissioning automation systems on site using wireless technologies that just work really well.
Yeah. Is there any, given all the experiences you've had and the examples you just mentioned, is there any environment now at this point that you would say you wouldn't be able to install a communication system in?
Well, I mean, everything has to be tested.
Yeah.
So, we don't go out and say we can just do anything. So,
Yeah.
for example, our wireless access point, that's like our mesh manager that controls, GrowFlux mesh on the site. It bridges that mesh connection to the cloud, and it maintains network time for all of your lights and all of your lighting controllers. Right now, we tell people that around 200 devices is a good number. And the reason
Okay.
for that is, well, there's a couple reasons. One is propagating a lighting schedule out to 200 devices takes a little bit of time,
Mm-hmm.
because what we do with our wireless mesh is we trade speed for reliability. So in order for us to propagate a wirelessly propagate a lighting schedule, like it's not like megabytes of data. So we can go really slow and improve the range penetration, error tolerance, and ultimately the reliability. But the trade-off is that we don't get a lot of speed.
Okay.
So when we tell people that we want to limit it to 200 devices per access point, our access point is a $149 device. They're fairly affordable. That's really for a better user experience. But we're always improving that. So we're actually getting ready to up that to 500 lights per access point,
Okay.
1,000 lights per pro access point. So we have two flavors of that access point. And then the other aspect of it is the software. So you can have the physical network is very capable, but if you're trying to load up 1,000 lights on the user interface in our app, as we take on bigger and bigger projects, we're always having to fine tune the app to display more and more stuff.
Yeah.
So we've been really careful to grow the size of the installations that we support carefully, rather than taking on some really big ones up front and then having to deal with a lot of headache. Right now our sweet spot is typically, like, we're often doing 1,200 to 2,000 light installations
Okay.
with our universal dimmer that controls up to 50 lights. It's a plug and play lighting controller. We're starting to look at the 1,000 light installs on our single light controller. That's where we actually have 1,000 wireless devices on one mesh.
Okay.
So yeah, it's we're just kind of taking baby steps so that we always have a good customer experience. We have over now nearly 200 farms globally using
Oh, wow.
our lighting controls, and maintaining that reputation for reliability is really important to us.
How much or how many of those installs are you being asked to also coordinate with what they already have existing? Because I imagine you do such a good job with controlling the lighting environment, but there's other factors at play there, right? There's probably automation happening depending how fancy the farm is, with
Mhm.
robotics, with irrigation, and so at some point, that it's helpful monitoring the overall health of the farm, and how much are you being asked to make sure that everything plays well with what's already existing?
Yeah, so we have a number of customers that are using our API to tie
Okay.
our lighting controls into other systems. Um, you know, we have we have a couple roadmap features underway that will streamline all of that. Um, we often have a lot. We actually have a lot of customers that really just want the lighting system to be its own uh, network
Yeah.
where they can make the adjustments on the fly as needed. I'd say that's actually more common than you might imagine. There's a lot of talk of fully automating the entire facility and then using things like AI, but this industry still uses a lot of outdated tech.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing is we're supporting a lot of these initiatives by providing very robust API addressable controls down to every light. So the businesses that are able to leverage that are doing it today. But increasingly, what we're doing is we're also partnering with other companies
Okay.
through integrations. So that's where our API talks to the API of another company, and you
Yeah.
don't need to do any programming to make that happen. You just click one thing. So that's all a bit of a you know that's kind of the shape of things to come in the next year or so. Um, sorry, I don't know. I don't know if I'm kind of answering your
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, that was helpful. And I wonder also, I noticed on your site, if I read it correctly, that you made a conscious decision to not manufacture lights anymore, but actually provide the controls for the lighting. And can you talk a little bit about that decision as well?
Yeah. So we started the company making tunable LED grow lights. We made a 600-watt top light with far red LEDs and broad spectrum white, blue, and deep red. And we got really great results. We did some really fascinating work with institutions like Cornell University. It is a really hard business to pull off. So we got that product fully launched. We got it UL certified. We got all the wet location ratings and such, and um, just maintaining that global supply chain for all of those components. I think there was like over 1,200 parts in our light. Um, and then just buying LEDs alone it's a hyper competitive space. So meanwhile, when we were making the lights, we were putting our wireless mesh in. We were starting to kick off some sensor integration projects. We had just launched the GrowFlux app for iOS and Android, and other lighting manufacturers were asking to license our wireless. We had three lighting brands ask to buy us in the really early days, and they made it clear that they were going to axe the lights and just stick with the IoT. And so we started kind of, it actually started out as a joke internally. Hey, what if we made a dimmer that controls our competitors' lights?
Mm.
And then, as the cost to maintain the supply chain and buy more LEDs
Yeah.
many months in advance, as those costs started mounting, and we're competing with we were like competing with like Philips
No, yeah,
projects.
no easy task there.
You just couldn't sustain that as a startup. So the internal joke, hey, what if we made a dimmer that controls our competitors' lights?
Yeah.
That became the main business plan.
Well, that was a smart decision, and I think almost that out of the box thinking, sort of like what Google does with their skunkworks. I imagine just like there's no idea that's too silly to put out there, and it seemed like
Mhm.
it's very prescient because it was the right decision to make it. Probably not an easy one to make too, but I think it was the right one at the time.
Oh no, it felt good. Yeah.
So, how, if you were to describe like an ideal client for GrowFlux, who would that be?
Well, we work with a couple different types of customers because, on the one hand, we spend a lot of time serving our lighting manufacturer customers,
Okay.
who provide our wireless controls alongside their lights. On the other hand, we also work more directly with the growers. So that is, providing plug and play controls often for existing systems,
Okay.
or new systems that they're separately procuring. So there's kind of two different customer bases for us.
Is GrowFlux your first stint as CEO?
Yeah,
Okay.
I previously found another company, but
Okay.
we didn't really get it far along enough to say that it was, took that to its, its full life cycle.
Yeah. And how many employees now?
Right now, we're a team of three. We're hiring
Okay.
now.
That's definitely sounds like you're in a growth stage. What's been the most I guess you would call them learning experiences as you've developed in the role as CEO?
Sorry, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
think of a response here.
We can the beauty is we can cut out the silence.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would say, one of the really interesting things I've learned over the last couple of years in this space is, a lot of people that are in a high level decision making role in this industry, if they don't have a lot of skin in the game, there's a propensity to just take the easy path and get the sale and
Hmm.
show the sales numbers.
Yeah.
And, we have seen how that plays out over the long term, when you're ultimately sacrificing reliability or customer experience. Um, and, we've made incredible investments in really, really difficult technology that takes years to get right.
Hmm.
And it's only coming to fruition in the last year or so. So to see that play out, and then on the other side of it, watch companies get run into the ground by the CEO that the PE guys put in place
Mm.
is is just really fascinating to watch because we're often working pretty closely with the executives at some of these companies, and I'm not only talking about lighting companies,
Yeah.
um, talking about other tech companies in
Sure.
the vertical farming and CEA space.
Who do you look to for inspiration when it comes to leadership?
Mm, sorry, I'm gonna have to think about
It's
that
okay.
one.
Just means it's a more thought out response, which is appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, who I look to for inspiration is really other founders,
Yeah,
because it is a really unique circumstance when your passion project for many years is your livelihood and is
yeah,
just your entire existence, really.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's I have a number of other founder friends that I'm very close to, and I think without that network, I would be much more in the dark for sure.
Yeah, it's something to be said, as a fellow business owner and entrepreneur who's tried many things that have failed. And then before getting to some of the things I've been working on my end, unless you have a close group of friends whose opinion you trust, who can tell you, what something really is like without, someone who just wants to tell you what they think you need to hear. I think that's really important to keep that network of that sounding board. Um, really active because it helps keep you sane. Because otherwise, if you try to just do it all yourself, I think you'd go a little crazy.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering now, as you're continuing to grow and expand in this space, what is the future of specifically, controls and lighting? Like, what do you see as in terms of innovation? Do you want GrowFlux to be part of that innovation, or are you seeing what's happening and just waiting to see how some of those spaces mature before you step into them?
Sure. Yeah. So only a few years ago, people looked at cloud technology in this space as something to be suspicious of. Uh, but today, most people want remote management of their systems. They want the convenience of cloud connectivity. So that's been a pretty significant shift over a space of only really about 4 years. And so, this industry today is really just embracing cloud technologies, whereas other industries are much further along. Um, so, I think what we're going to see in the coming years is a true ecosystem of companies that can leverage new technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning
Hmm.
at scale
Yeah.
with market leaders. And what we're starting to see is that companies that are the best in class at their respective technology are starting to embrace newer technologies and play together within these ecosystems. In other industries, we see very rich ecosystems of tech companies that work together, and they actually even create app ecosystems between themselves. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of those types of integrations are coming to the space. So we have an inside look into what a lot of the what a lot of companies are considering. So I'm really excited about that.
Are you familiar with the website Zapier?
Vaguely, yes.
Yeah, so basically it helps connect like, tools, and now there's probably hundreds or thousands of integrations
Mhm.
you can make. I'm wondering if there's a Zapier for the ag tech space when you talk about APIs and the ability to, have some of these technologies speak to each other in an intelligent way. And I'm wondering, just thinking out loud, if there's an opportunity for something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. There's actually a company. I forget the name of the company. They just raised a pile of cash a couple months back,
Okay,
essentially doing that.
okay.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for those types of plays for sure. For agriculture, the thing is, what works in other industries doesn't always work in agriculture.
Yeah,
Um, the the whole buying criteria is totally different. The sales
yeah,
cycle is different.
yeah.
Where people buy is different. So it's going to take on its own very unique shape
Hmm.
in this space, but it's for sure it's definitely coming. So
What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
mm, let's see. Yeah, we ask ourselves a lot of tough questions around uh, product roadmap
Okay.
and planning out resources. There's so many products and features that we and our customers want to roll out. But we're often, having to straddle maintaining all the systems and customer experience and reliability and availability of our products with new product development. So that's often something that's really tough. 2021 was a tough year supply chain wise.
Yeah.
So we're just getting out from under that and are now able to focus more on that new product development. But yeah, we've been asking a lot of tough questions on that front over the last year or so.
Can you see the silver lining in 2021 in so much as it helped you rethink things regarding your supply chain that may not have been top of mind at that time for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, we reinvented our entire supply chain. We've redeveloped a lot of the internal components of our products to eliminate sole source components and things like
Yeah.
that. We've changed how we manufacture our products. It's been 2021 completely upended how we make our products.
That's great. What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a good answer here because I know there's one that is just escaping me right now.
Yeah.
And it's something I was arguing with my co-founder Alex about.
Yeah.
Can we return to this one?
Yeah, no problem. I'm curious, as you attend these conferences, if you find it's important to maintain and develop relationships with not only possible partners and customers in the space, but even someone that may be considered a competitor or someone who does something in similar space. It feels like it's, from these conversations, I've been doing the show for almost 2 years now, and just it's still small, from the out, internally it seems like, there's a lot going on, but from the external viewpoint, it's still a growing industry as well. So I'm wondering how you think about building, nurturing, cultivating those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, we build relationships with a lot of even customers that have competing products to us. We kind of came from the really early days of the vertical farming industry when a lot of companies were, very secretive. And to be honest, like the most secretive ones that just wouldn't really discuss anything, well, all those guys are gone. So, if you're really good at what you do, the thing that you do should be really hard to replicate and really hard to pull off.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we do. So we're very open about discussing, how our technology works, where we're going. And what we found is that it's only really benefited us because, what any one particular company might be working on today might get put on the shelf tomorrow,
Yeah.
and they may have to reach for a solution that's much closer to deployment. And with that in mind, that's actually how we've done a lot of business. Is we've been quite open
Yeah.
compared to other companies about our timeline and our roadmap, and that's gotten us into some really really interesting projects.
That's good. Yeah, keeping that open mind to all sorts of partnerships, and even some that you may not be able to predict that could be coming your way. Just sort of having that mindset, I think, is helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, back when we made lights, we still, were really, cognizant about, keeping really good relationships with the other lighting manufacturers because, like, you never know if you're going to get rolled up with one of them.
Yeah.
So, we were, we were very cognizant of that back when we made lights, and then all of those people became our customers. So
Yeah.
we already
Smart.
knew them at that point. So.
And as we get towards the latter part of the year, any other conferences on your radar?
Let's see. Yeah. So Resilient Harvests is coming up.
Okay.
So we're looking forward to that one. Uh, and sorry, I'm like
That's
not
okay. That's okay.
coming off of the weekend. It's like I completely put work
Yeah,
away, and before this, I was right on top of our travel schedule, and now
yeah,
I'm I'm sorry.
yeah. I've done 3 trips in the past 3 weeks, so I get for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. We have a couple events coming up on our travel schedule. A couple of them are cannabis trade shows. We have
Okay,
Resilient Harvest coming up
okay,
uh, end of October, early November,
okay.
and of course, in the cannabis space, there's MJBizCon, which is always a very busy one for us.
Okay. Is it one of
Um,
the bigger ones?
MJBizCon?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So for us, it is because we're typically exhibiting in a half dozen booths.
Oh, wow.
Um, sorry, I should probably give that response back.
No worries.
Um, here, let me just pause this real quick.
Yeah, take time.
Yeah, so for us, it is because we're typically exhibiting in a half dozen booths. So we have lighting manufacturers, distributors showing off our products in their booths. So we're at the show to support them, but then also to just maintain relationships with all the other clients as well. So it is one of those shows where we actually don't get a booth
Okay.
because it's just like there's just a lot of noise to cut through.
Yeah, I'm sure. So as we wrap up, I wanna thank you for taking the time to share the story. A lot of it was really fascinating for me, just learning, getting a bit of 101 on lighting and its impact on not only circadian rhythms but also just the ability to which you can control it. I think is something that surprises a lot of people. And it's been fascinating to see how it's just that early interest, that early tinkering, when you think about the trajectory of your career and the decisions you've made, how they've led to you doing now something that seems to be a mix of all your passions together. So, it's really inspiring to hear your story and I appreciate you sharing it.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for your time. Fun.
Given the audience here, and you've seen that some of your peers are folks that are not only been guests on there, but also listen to the show. Is
Mhm.
there an ask that you have for this specific audience?
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes, there is, and that is, we think a lot about you know taking practices from other industries that have had to adapt, uh, and what we look to do is we look to borrow successful strategies from adjacent industries, whether it's factory automation or pharma packaging and storage, for example. And so when you look at how these systems come together, it's often easier to take a successful playbook from an adjacent industry and see what lessons, not exactly like replicate it,
Yeah,
but at least see which lessons you can learn there. And that's something that we encourage a lot of our partners and customers to think about.
yeah,
Um, and ultimately, this industry has so much growth ahead of it. And I really feel in the coming years and decades that we are going to have to just hyperscale, and we have to learn from other industries.
yeah,
So
definitely. Some that I just remembered from your childhood. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask how many times you've run up the rocky stairs.
as a Philadelphian, I I always kind of thought it was a little cheesy, the
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
uh, yeah, Rocky thing.
yeah,
Yeah, honestly, I don't think I've ever done it. I mean, I've been on the stairs many
Yeah,
times.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
no, it's not.
It's funny because I think we went with my ex-wife to the Dali exhibit at the museum, and I was like, oh man, and as a child growing up watching that movie, I was like,
I,
you feel the need to do it. So, well,
I don't think I've ever done it.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
one of those things. Like I grew up in New York. It's like people ask me how many times you've been to like the Statue of Liberty or like
Right,
the Empire
right.
State Building. I'm just like once. Yeah, that's about
Yeah,
it.
they moved that statue to
Oh,
the
they
museum
did.
itself,
Oh,
which
okay,
years ago when that happened,
okay.
it drove a lot of people nuts.
Sure. Well, thanks again, Eric. I really had a fun time with this conversation. GrowFlux.com for people to learn more. Any other sites you want to direct people to connect with you or the company?
Yeah, no, growflux.com is where you can reach us for sure.
Okay. I appreciate it again. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Another project that you're working on is IN2. So can you go into a little bit of, I'm gonna do that again.
Mhm.
Um, so can you talk a little bit about the IN2 project? I know it's something that Wells Fargo is driving, but I'm curious to hear what your experience with it has been.
Sure, yeah. So that's the innovation incubator. Wells Fargo gave us a grant, a $250,000 grant to collaborate with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, that's NREL, and the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. And so what we're doing is we're taking our more advanced lighting control algorithm, that's we call it precision PAR. PAR stands for photosynthetic active radiation. So what precision PAR does is it takes various sources of data uh, in the cloud, along with data from light sensors in the greenhouse. So we partner with Apogee Instruments for that. And we take all this data together, and we, uh, in real time, optimize the lighting system to essentially like a daily diet of light for the crop.
Okay.
And so actually building this out and proving out the reliability and the energy savings, validating it with a commercial crop. We're growing tomatoes this fall
Okay.
at the Danforth Center uh, with these new algorithms. And then they're also backwards compatible with all of the lighting controls we've ever shipped. So it's really the first of its kind plug and play lighting control algorithm for greenhouse agriculture that works with any light on the market via our controls, or anyone that's integrating GrowFlux mesh into their own lights.
Okay.
And so it's been an outstanding experience to collaborate with Wells Fargo, with NREL, and the Danforth Center. Um, we're actually having a conference next month, AgTech Next, and meeting all the other IN2 companies. So I'm pretty
Mm.
excited about that.
And kudos to Wells Fargo for having an interest in that. I wonder if it goes back to their early days with actual, supporting farmers and in agriculture as well.
Yeah, it does. Traditionally, they've been a lender in the ag space.
Yeah.
Um, and, they started the IN2 program. I believe initially they were targeting energy efficiency, like commercial building energy efficiency companies,
Okay.
but then if I believe I'm correct, they then expanded into funding ag tech companies. So we're really really lucky to have Wells Fargo as a partner.
Very exciting. Thanks for sharing that.